Hello and welcome everyone to the State of the Channel address for Q2 2017. We're a little bit late, but that's because there was some big news that I had to prepare for, and we're going to be talking about that today. So the main headlines for this video is going to be that I am launching a Patreon campaign. Now what that is it's a crowdfunding effort asking for people to help support documentaries. So the money that comes in is going to be spent on improving the quality and quantity of documentaries, and we're going to be doing that by investing in artists, researchers, scriptwriters, editors, people like that, and also resources to make, like I said, documentaries better and make more of them. So that's the campaign. There's a lot of perks and stuff to it. So check out the video that I'm linking here and below as well so you can see what that's all about. But yeah, that's kind of the general gist. Now let's get into the State of the Channel itself. So generally the way these State of the Channel addresses run is I do them at the end of every quarter, and it's to be transparent about the channel. It's broken up into 4 parts. The first is the intro and overview, the second is the retrospective, the third the future goals, and then after that it's feedback. So those are the main components. Let's get into the intro and overview. So generally speaking, the main things we're going to talk about is launching the Patreon campaign. Now I did preempt that, so we've already talked about that. The second part we're going to be talking about in this video is going to be the Moment series, and then third is going to be the direction of the channel. So those are kind of the main overarching parts of this State of the Channel address. Let's get into the retrospective. So in the retrospective, what we like to do is kind of look back on what's happened since the last State of the Channel address, and that way we keep tabs on the channel. So yeah, at the last State of the Channel address, we announced the rebrand. We changed the names from THFA Productions to Invicta, and we also have new banners and logos and all that stuff. So I think the rebrand has gone very well, and so yeah, that is great. So that's been a pretty big success. Another thing that's changed from the last State of the Channel address we focused a lot more on documentaries. I've put out 3 Dragon Warfare documentaries on Game of Thrones lore and 4 Moments episodes. So that means we've put out 7 documentaries this quarter. Compare that to just 2 the previous quarter. So that is a nice turnaround. So I hope you guys are enjoying that. So that's been great. So lots of documentaries and more focus on history. On top of that, I did launch a Facebook and Twitter pages. Those are now officially up and running, where you can find out a lot about interesting stuff that I post that's kind of tangentially related to history. A lot of it is behind the scenes, and then also some of the stuff that I'm doing on the side. So for instance, some of the milestones that I'll be announcing here, you would have heard about them over on the social media posts, and those include my interview with Radio New Zealand, 9 to noon. They wanted to interview me, talk about history and Total War and YouTube, and it was a very interesting conversation of how those 3 kind of go together. So that was awesome. Another thing that was great is over the last couple of weeks I was reached out to by a museum curator at the Haifa Museum. It's essentially the National Maritime Museum in Israel, so this was super cool. They have one of the biggest bronze castings for a naval ship ram, and so alongside that and alongside the exhibit, they're going to be putting up my documentary. So I'm very excited about those 2 things. So yeah, if you're over on the social media, Facebook or Twitter, you would have heard about that. I also tease history stuff, so definitely check those out if you're interested in that type of content. So that's kind of what we've done over the past couple months. The next thing we can look at over the about 3.25 months since the last State of the Channel address is going to be growth. So growth, we like to look at this because that's obviously, you know, how is the channel doing? Are people coming? Are they enjoying it? Are they staying? So yeah, let's get into this. I'm very excited. So growth for the last quarter was some of the best performance I've had to date, and that is very good. So subscribers, this is mostly driven by the Moment series, but in the last kind of 3.5 months, we've gotten almost 40K subs. Consider now that I'm almost at 200K. That means that over this past quarter, 20% of our subscriber base has come aboard. Now that is huge, and that's exactly what I was looking for. So that has me very excited. If you look at the growth spikes themselves, they're astronomical. The highest one that I had was 2240 subs a day, which is really good. That is like double or triple the past high record that I had for peaks. The amount of growth that I've seen in this past quarter is more than I've seen at the launch of new Total War games, which is generally where I get a lot of growth. So that to me is very, very exciting. So yeah, that's very awesome. So yeah, definitely tremendous growth, and I expect to see more of it as we continue along this path. And that's the point of this State of the Channel address, is to get input from you guys so we can take the right steps forward. So looking back, we like to do 2 things as well. What went well, what went poorly. So what went well? The rebrand, like I said, went really well. I think it's ingrained and people are starting to refer to me as Invicta, and I think it sticks. It's a lot better than THFE Productions. So yeah, Invicta it is, and I'm happy with that. The other thing is the Moment series. The Moment series is great. That is one of the main contributors to the growth that I've seen so far. And another great thing about it is the fact that the Moment series kind of changes up the way we do history. The long-form history documentaries were great, but they're very specific. Moments is more like an everyman's history. It remains very interesting, but it's much more accessible. And so some of the growth, or actually most of the growth that I've seen, has been people outside of my traditional history and Total War bubble. And that's what's really brought in the growth. So to me, that's a very big plus. And that was the intent of Moments. The fact that it can cater to hardcore history fans, but also the general public. So yeah, that is a great thing that's going well. Also social media, like I said, we've seen growth there, and I've been able to share some cool content that I don't otherwise have an outlet for. So yeah, teasers and whatnot. So let's go to what went poorly. So over the last quarter, like I said, we put out 7 documentaries. 4 of those were the Moment series. Those hit it out of the park. Those were astronomically good. Now, what went poorly, though, is going to be the 3 other documentaries. These are going to be the Dragon Warfare series. So I had put out, like I said, 3, and they were based on Game of Thrones lore. The first was going to be Anatomy of Dragon Warfare. The second was History of Dragon Warfare, and the third was Tactics. So I put sweat, blood, and tears into those. I think they're extremely high quality, but unfortunately they just didn't take. So that was kind of a downer for me to put a lot of effort in and not get much reward. So we are putting that concept of going into Game of Thrones lore, we're putting that back on the shelf. So it's an idea we tried, and we can resurrect it in the future, but for now, we're going to consider this as a proof of concept and move on. So that's a little bit of a downer for me. Another thing that perhaps could have gone poorly, maybe not in my eyes, but in the eyes of the viewer, is, yeah, you've put out 7 documentaries, but none of them have been the long-form documentaries. None of them have been Jerusalem Part 3. None of them have been Evolution of the Roman Legions Part 2. So I recognize that that's a problem, but you have to understand kind of the business strategy and kind of the strategy of the channel. The strategy of the channel is to get to a point where we can produce documentaries en masse and we're sustainable. And to be able to do that, I have to have the Moment series. The Moment series is supposed to be the easy history that brings in views, that brings in resources, that allows me to pitch a Patreon campaign to bring in more money and attention. All of that helps to support the channel. Without that lifeblood, I don't have the ability to hire outside help and, you know, take that burden off of me to then be able to pivot back and do the long-form documentaries. If I had just not done the Moment series and I had done the 2 documentaries, what I would be reporting to you this quarter would be, hey, we put out 2 episodes of documentaries, and presumably we didn't show much growth for it. We weren't able to launch this Patreon campaign. And to me, that's really not the direction I have to go. So bear with me. I understand it's frustrating, but the whole point of this is to put me in a position to get back to those without, you know, drowning me under work. So yeah, we're positioning ourselves in a way such that we can get back to those. So I know it's taking a little bit longer than expected, but it's all part of a plan, so to speak. So yeah, that's it for the retrospective. Let's move on to future goals. And for future goals, the overarching theme for this is going to be, I want to invest in documentaries. I want to be all about history. And so the channel thus far has been a mix of history and Total War. There's a way to make that work, but the Total War side of things has kind of like reached its threshold. There's not much more innovation I can do. It's reporting on gameplay and following new titles. There's not too much more. When it comes to history, I can innovate. I can do a lot more stuff. So future goals are mostly going to be based around the history side of things. So there's many things we can discuss. So the first is going to be, in terms of future goals, I want to be able to put out better and more documentaries. So how are we going to do that? Well, the first is going to be through the Patreon campaign. The Patreon campaign, as I keep stating, is going to be a way for me to raise money and invest that into hiring artists, researchers, scriptwriters, editors, and whatnot. And kind of my goal for Patreon this quarter is to get up to about a funding goal of $1,000 per episode, because that's enough to hire both an artist and a researcher who can help out. You have to keep in mind that for the Moment series, each art piece takes about an hour's time to create the silhouette, to color it in, and do all that stuff. That's one piece of art is 1 hour. There's about in excess of between 10 and 20 pieces of art. So that's like 10 to 20 hours. And if you factor in that freelancers charge about anywhere between 60 to 100, yeah, that means that we're spending in about the ballpark of about $1,000 an episode just to get the artwork. Now I could do it myself, but that again limits how much output we have. So that's why the spending goal is $1,000, because that way we can hire on an artist to be able to do this stuff. And that'll be great, because right now I'm spending that money out of pocket and we're operating at a deficit. So yeah, Patreon campaign goals, $1,000 for this quarter. Other things that we can do is going to be moments. So the big thing that I want to do to grow the history side of this channel is going to be moments. Now, this is obviously intrinsically tied to the Patreon campaign, in that the funding of the Patreon campaign will go to invest in the moments. But more specifically about moments, let's talk about the strategy here. So last quarter, moments was launching. That was phase one. That was proving the viability of the format. I had to produce an art style that worked, a script writing style that worked, and I had to see if people were enjoying it. So on those three fronts, I think we have done exceptionally well. The subscriber growth has attested to that. The fact that the first episode, within just a month and a half at this point, has gotten to almost 400K views. The next one up is 360K views. So these are doing very well. So phase one, viability is absolutely proven. Now phase two is going to be this quarter. And so once you've proven that a product is viable, you have to prove that the business model is sustainable. And so this phase of the Moment series is going to be about sustainability. So Patreon campaign is going to be part of that sustainability, to be able to operate at not a deficit and, you know, have money to spend on artists and whatnot. So part of proving sustainability for this quarter is going to be crowdfunding. So that's Patreon. Sponsors and partners. So let's speak briefly about those second two. So sponsors and partners. The way I want to pitch the Moment series is, yes, part of it is crowdfunding, but I want to be able to partner and find sponsors. So the way this works is the Moment series is kind of, it generates general public's interest in history, and I can take that and I can find a sponsor for it, or I can find a partner for that. So for instance, a sponsor would be, let's say this recent Dunkirk movie is coming out. I can go ahead and talk to a Hollywood or whoever the advertising group is for that, and I can say, hey, partner with me, you know, pay me some sort of sponsorship fund to pay my artists and researchers, and I will produce a Moments episode about Dunkirk. And that's a win-win, because what you guys get is you get the paid documentary, so I get to produce it from the funds produced by paid by that advertising group. So that's great. So we get a documentary out of it, which is awesome. And what the other people get out of it, what the movie studio gets out of it, is the fact that we're organically generating interest in the Dunkirk topic. And so this is something that could be replicated for all sorts of things. So for example, HBO has produced multiple series on the Second World War. Band of Brothers, The Pacific, those are great. There's a rumor that they're creating a third that's going to be focused on the the bomber pilots of World War II. And so what I could do is I could reach out to HBO and say, hey, let's partner. Do you want to be a sponsor for a Moments episode? They would pay for it. And in response, I would then say, hey, you know, we're going to do an episode on deadliest moments in history, the fighter bombers of the Second World War, and talk about how the high casualty rates were actually really in the armed forces much more focused on these pilots, and really talk about that. So it's interesting history, but at the end I would say, hey, this is powered by whatever the name of that series is. So that's kind of how I see phase two going. Now, I want to keep it balanced. I don't want every episode to be something sponsored by a corporation. Obviously, the crowdfunding is there to allow us to do topics that aren't, you know, mandated by an outside group. And at the same time, I only want to pick sponsorship deals that make sense. So part of this is going to be driven by crowdfunding, recommendations of people on Patreon. Part of it is going to be, what kind of deals can I make with movies or TV shows or even video games that are coming out? And then the third one is going to be partnership. So I can even partner with other people to have them work on the Moment series. So for instance, Patrick Wyman is doing a Fall of Rome history series. I've talked to him, and he's going to be writing a script and narrating an episode. So that's a nice exchange of resources where I get the research and the script, so we produce an easy documentary on the Empire's Last Gamble, talking about the attempts of the East to reclaim the West with the attempted reconquest of North Africa. So that's an episode where he benefits because he gets exposure to my audience, or they get exposure to him. They hear his voice, they hear his research, they hear a plug for his podcast series, and in return, I get, you know, a free script and a free narration. So that's kind of the dynamics we'll be looking for in this quarter. And I think if it proves successful, and I think it will, what we'll end up seeing is, you know, with all these people working and with money coming in and with hires, how many documentaries can we put out? So this next quarter, I'm hoping to top the amount of documentaries we've seen in the previous quarter. So for you, the viewer, that means a lot more history content in general. So that has me excited. So that's about it for the future goals. It's almost like going pro and focusing on history. Now let's move on to the feedback section. So again, the main purpose of the State of the Channel address is to be as transparent as possible. I want to tell you what's going on. I want your input because thus far it's proved very, very useful. This is what has gotten us this far. So the feedback for this episode, I want you to leave it in the comments below, but there's two things. one, I want you to go ahead and check out the Patreon page. You don't have to feel that you have to contribute to it, but I do really want to hear your feedback about the way I've structured it, about the way perhaps you think I could find help for these documentaries. So definitely talk to me about ways we could crowdfund and ways we could sustain and make this Moment series viable in the long run. So definitely give your feedback on the Patreon campaign in moments below. But kind of one of the most important things that I want to address, and this is going to start creeping up, is the fact that the more and more we focus on history, the more and more it kind of starts to rub up against the Total War content. Now, the way this kind of works is, one, just straight up, the amount of videos that I put out, they're competing. So if I start putting out more and more history, there's just less time slots and time in general for me to produce Total War content. Now, the other thing as well is audiences. Right now, we have a kind of an audience that likes both Total War and history. But what's happening is, if more and more people come outside and they come here just for the history and they see their news feed cluttered with Total War stuff, and that includes Warhammer Fantasy news flashes and updates, that's going to turn them off, and it kind of causes a problem. So I think what I'm going to start to consider is splitting up the channel. And so what I might consider doing is spinning off the Total War content and putting that on a side channel that would be called Invicta Gaming, where the main channel, once we prove that, you know, the moments and documentaries in general are sustainable, the main channel is going to be 100% history stuff. And then the side channel is going to be continuing up with the Total War content. So that way you can kind of have separate subscriber feeds, and I think it'll be a happy medium. That being said, I do really want to ask for your feedback on that. Do you think I should split the channels? Are you kind of a bit irked by the fact that there is both content? So yeah, I would love to hear back from you. Anyways, that's it for this State of the Channel address. I hope you guys enjoyed. I really make an effort to be transparent, so I hope you appreciate that. And be open and honest in the comments below about what you think. And I will end, as we always do, with the state of the channel is strong. And I do say that not in a ceremonial way this time, but literally, we are going strong. The growth that we've seen is very encouraging, and I think the path we have going forward is also very encouraging. So yeah, I think we have great things ahead, and I'm very excited to unveil even more projects that I haven't even been able to announce in this video itself. So definitely stay tuned and consider contributing to the Patreon campaign to make documentaries possible. So that's it. See you in the next one. Peace out.